Oh, okay.
Okay, we're going to actually start off with just a prayer. I like starting off with a prayer, so let's do that. Scarlett, would you? Make it short and sweet.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this day and this opportunity we have to gather to talk about law. Please bless us with thy Spirit so that we may learn and understand what thou would have us learn and understand. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so thanks for coming. This class, there's multiple things we're going to dive into. The main purpose of it is to just break down law and mostly explain why the assemblies and other things when it comes to law actually has some moral precedent. One of the biggest, I guess you could say, blockades to people actually learning about their rights and defending them is a crippling fear that somehow what they're doing is not allowed or not right. And so the whole purpose of this class, at least this first one, is the fundamentals of why law is actually important and why it's moral. And for those that are going to be watching this online later, I will note that we are taking from some LDS sources, but when we dive into American common law, it is no less applicable to life than it is anyway. So to start, I have a quote on the board, and Dad, do you mind reading it?
All kingdoms have a law given, and there are many kingdoms. For there is no space in which there is no kingdom, and there is no kingdom in which there is no space, either a greater or a lesser kingdom. And unto every kingdom is given a law, and unto every law there are certain bounds also and conditions. All beings who abide not in those conditions are not justified.
Okay, who knows where this comes from, other than people that were told earlier? That's Joseph Smith, boys. Joseph Smith said that. It's pretty great. No, but this is actually an important principle. There's a really cool story, and I don't remember the exact details of it, but when Joseph Smith was first publishing the Book of Mormon, he's actually more of a political figure than people give him credit, but when he was first publishing it, he was actually publishing sections of it in a newspaper, right? This was before they got the printing press and everything. And as they were sending out copies, one of the guys that was publishing things about the LDS Church, I forgot what his name was.
Grandin?
I don't know. No, not Grandin. But one of the guys that was publishing some of his stuff was actually throwing in his little excerpts to make jokes about the LDS people, about the Mormons and stuff. So they were making fun of it. And one time Joseph Smith approached him and was like, hey, this is cool. You can't do this. Like, it's actually against the law to do this. And the guy was like making fun of Joseph Smith for it. And then he was like, fight me. He tried to fist fight with Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith, he kept his coat on and he said, you will learn sooner if not later, or later if not sooner, that there is law. And then he like simply walked away. And that's one of the cool things that we learn about Joseph Smith is that he was actually somebody that was very politically involved, okay? So when you read a lot of the writings, obviously the LDS Church became an incorporated church and has really capitalized on a lot of his resources and pushed them toward the religious side of it. But if you read some of the things from the early history of the church, it's very political. It's not just religious. It wasn't a religion before it was a political group. So some things to keep in mind. But let's kind of dissect this just a little bit. Thoughts, comments on this quote specifically?
One of the things that strikes me is that second portion where it says, for there is no space in which there is no kingdom, applies to everything from the expanse of the universe all the way down to the smallest, most minute atoms, molecules, whatever it is that's smaller than that we've been able to discover. That every one of those spaces has its very own kingdom with its own laws. That's mind-boggling.
Yeah. To elaborate just a little bit on that, it's really simple when you think about it in terms of the body and its cellular structure. When you have a cell that doesn't function like it's supposed to, your body literally rejects it. Similarly, in our society, if you don't function under the law, you get rejected, right? Imprisoned, or if you're really bad, executed. So, great thought. This is actually one of the things I'm going to dive into, okay? So the reason I brought up this quote is because jurisdiction, it's a word you got to get super familiar with when studying anything regarding the assemblies or even American common law. Jurisdiction is everything. It's literally everything. Because a jurisdiction, the definition of it is, where is the line drawn at which this law applies? Okay, here's an example. This is one of the examples I can use. The threshold of my door right there is actually a jurisdictional boundary. People don't realize this. The way you can tell if there's a jurisdictional boundary is if there's a law that applies on one side of it that doesn't apply on the other. Okay, so example. It's actually totally legal and lawful for me to walk around naked in my house. I can do it, not go to jail. Minute I walk outside that door, I'm going to jail for indecent exposure. Okay? If I'm walking around naked in my house and someone on the other side of the window is peeping through my freaking blinds and he's looking at me, he's the criminal, right? Because he's invading my privacy. Okay? That threshold changes who the victim is and who the criminal is by walking over that threshold. It's a really good example of, in certain instances, something is absolutely lawful, and in another, it's absolutely not. So recognizing jurisdictional boundaries is going to be everything with you figuring out how to live as an American in society, knowing where those boundaries are, knowing in which jurisdictions which laws apply. Thoughts, comments?
That's why vampires have to be invited in.
100%. It's actually a hilarious quote. They refer to police officers as that. As soon as you'll also notice if they don't have a warrant and they're like, oh, can we come inside your house? As soon as you're like, yeah, you open the door and they walk in, they're allowed to search your entire house and they don't have to leave. You cannot physically force them to leave if you've invited them in your door. But if you haven't, you can shut the door and they have no right to break it open, like legitimately. So people will sometimes refer to police officers as vampires because once you invite them through the threshold, you're hooked. Anyway, thoughts, comments about that? I would love this to be a discussion forum. I know there's a lot to dissect, and I want questions from people who are normal people, who would ask the questions, even if they don't sound like smart questions. So
is that the first thing you're going to talk about, is different jurisdictions?
one of the things we're going to dive into after I segue away from this is our founding fathers and what specific jurisdictions apply to Americans. So we are going to dissect this. That's the whole purpose of this meeting. So yeah.
I've got a question for you. What do you think of this? Frequently when I'm going along Highway 19, I see other police officers from other towns, like Homedale or Parma. Let's say I'm speeding like 75 miles an hour. Since they are no longer in their township jurisdiction, could they pull me over and give me a ticket?
Yes, that's a great question. So there's actually multiple layers of that. So first, it will make more sense, the answer I'm giving, after we've discussed certain jurisdictional boundaries further on in this class. But in short answer, the people that are functioning as police officers are actually LEOs. They're law enforcement officers. They're considered privateers under Pinkerton laws. And so it's no different than Walmart having their security guy and Winco has their security guy take leave. And so Winco calls up Walmart and says, hey, do you have an extra guy around that can come over real quick? They say, yeah. They send one of their guys over. Winco's going to pay Walmart. Walmart's going to pay their guy. So it's a business. You can hire other people. Now, their name might match the county, right? Their cop car might say Shoshone County, but they aren't actually peacekeeping officers on Shoshone County. They are for-profit, for-hire security personnel that are in the business of providing security personnel. So any other de facto agency that's given jurisdiction over a certain area can hire them to do anything.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What do you mean de facto?
Okay. Yeah, this is actually a term we use a lot. So de facto is an antonym of de jure. Both of them are Latin phrases. Okay. De jure is the natural or the actually authoritative. Okay. De facto is the default because of lack of a de jure. Right? So when you say de facto, you're actually saying this is the default government service provider because the actual authoritative government service provider isn't around. Great example is a stepfather. Not your actual dad. He could be referred to as your de facto father because your real dad's not there.
Got it. Makes sense.
Make sense? Good? Okay, that's a term we'll use a lot, so that's great. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go over into the Founding Fathers. So this is a great quote. We're going to discuss jurisdictions that apply to American common law, unless there's any other last comments on what we just went over. Okay? Okay, so we kind of illustrated already that jurisdictional boundaries are everything when it comes to American common law. Okay? Our Founding Fathers were geniuses when they set up the American government. Okay? You have the states and the people. You have the Federation of States that was created by the people. And then you have the Confederation of States that was created by the Federation of States to start delegating authorities. And then you have some foreign government service providers that were hired to provide certain services. But our founding fathers were smart enough to recognize that man is only bound by those laws that nature dictates. In other words, if you have a natural ability, you have a natural right, as long as you do not take away the natural ability of someone else. Make sense?
Could you enumerate some of those just so it's clear for everybody?
Yep. Freedom to speak. That's one of them. The freedom of speech is one of the major ones, okay? Freedom of movement. Your ability to go where you will as long as you're not harming someone else's property, trespassing, harming somebody else's ability to do as they will, right? Freedom to own property. That's one of the things. It's a natural right. It is something that naturally exists in the natural realm. So what I'm getting at here is our founding fathers were smart enough to base all of American common law on natural law. Okay? So the way to do that is they built the American government under natural jurisdictions. Okay? That threshold isn't necessarily a natural jurisdiction. A man built that, right? And this is actually gonna get fun. This is where I'm gonna go. There are certain boundaries that are very natural boundaries that are a change of jurisdiction, okay? So let's see, yeah, this color works. So we're gonna talk about land and sea, right? So this is land, okay? And the blue is gonna be sea. Okay, this is one of the most prominent and noticeable divides in the natural world, okay? When you see water dividing land, it's a natural line. Think of it in like the most archaic sense, okay? You're a caveman and you're walking out and you draw a line on the ground and you say, my side, your side. You stay over there, I stay over here, right? And it's funny, but it's actually exactly what happens when it comes to countries and the establishment of governments, because somebody has to establish who owns what, right? So lines are drawn, okay? One of the most natural places that these lines naturally shows up is the divide between land and sea, okay? Now, here's something that's interesting. Land is where man naturally lives, okay? Sea is where man naturally dies. Just an interesting thought. It'll make more sense a lot later. But questions on this specific jurisdictional boundary?
What about the sky?
Yep, that's another one we're about to dive into. So, thank you. That's actually great. I'm going to go ahead and use the blue. This is the air, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and put air right here. We'll put sea right here, and we'll put land right here. Okay, we see those? Okay, the air jurisdiction, this is some interesting things about these different jurisdictions. These all exist in the natural world, and this one's different than this one, this one's different than that one. This is global jurisdiction, okay? Because the air is literally global. It goes around the entire earth, it's everywhere, okay? Sea is international jurisdiction, naturally, because it exists internationally, in between different nations, okay? Land is, generally speaking, more national jurisdiction unless there's lines drawn. Then it changes a little bit, and we're going to get into that. Does anybody have questions about these three jurisdictions? Make sense? Okay. Here's something that our founding fathers did that was really, really smart, okay? They separated the government into two branches, okay? One considered international and one considered national, okay? And to do that, they actually had to separate the difference between the soil jurisdiction and the land jurisdiction. So anybody that's familiar with a beach side or anything, you notice the land goes out into the sea a little bit more than the dry ground does. Make sense? Okay, so, sorry, you gonna say something?
So you're talking about the difference between land and soil.
I'm gonna dive into that, yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So this actually creates a little bit of a different jurisdiction. Remember when I was talking about drawing lines and being like, I caveman, my side, your side? Okay, that's what happens when people draw lines on the top soil, right? When you draw a line on the ground, it doesn't exist deep into the earth, right? It exists on not the subsoil. What word am I looking for? Subsoil? The topsoil. It exists on the soil. So there's a difference between the soil jurisdiction and the land jurisdiction. The reason is this piece of land can be an entire continent, okay? Whereas the soil jurisdiction might just be a specific drawn out area that belongs to one nation. Does that make sense?
Like Canada and the United States.
Great example. Yep. One continent, land jurisdiction, but different nations, right? Okay, questions about that? We following?
So, like, free American on the land and soil. How is that?
So when you're on land and soil, it's because you're standing above this. You're not standing above this.
Okay.
And that'll make a little bit more sense as we dive further into it. But okay, I'm trying to think. A little bit more that we can break apart here is the seas. There's a difference between this waterway, which is considered maritime jurisdiction, if I can remember how to spell maritime. Okay, versus admiralty or the high seas, right? Okay,
So
that's the high seas,
what is-
that's maritime.
Okay,
And the difference
maritime's
is-
just like on a beach.
Yeah, but the difference is this water actually encompasses and is close to and above land that belongs to certain nations. Okay, so there's actually a little bit of a different jurisdiction for up close waters, up close to the land, versus further out there in the high seas. Okay, so let me just catch my thoughts real quick.
Can I ask you a kind of a pedantic question?
Yes.
About that? Is the maritime jurisdiction the same for every country, or does each country have they decide, okay, our maritime jurisdiction goes from the coast out 5 miles or a mile, and is that the same around the world, or does each nation
Yeah,
come up with their own?
it's kind of both. So you do have some international jurisdictions that are like agreed upon with the Geneva Conventions and stuff. Like you're not supposed to fly within this distance of whatever with your military stuff without technically being a threat. But there are certain areas that are just super unique land masses. Like some of them that are like a scattered about certain amount of islands, right? The in-between waters might be greater than the normal maritime jurisdiction, but it's still considered part of theirs because...
So there's probably some overlap with places like that.
Exactly. Yeah, but generally speaking, there are, I don't know off the top of my head exactly what they are, but yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so this is interesting. Sorry, I apologize. I'm trying to remember where I was going to go with this. Okay, so our founding fathers are geniuses, okay? They separated the land and the soil jurisdiction, right? For all time, it was always like, this is my spot, you do your thing as long as you stay on your side, and laws are made, and depending on whether or not something's unlawful or lawful depends on where it happens. Now, this is where we get into a little bit of semantics, and whenever you're studying law, semantics is essentially important. It doesn't matter what law dictionary you bring up, semantics is everything. There is a whole certain amount of what people call legalese, which is like a language in of itself. It sounds like English, it looks like English, you say it, a lot of the words are like the same, but it might mean something completely different. A great example of this is the word legal, if I can spell it, legal and lawful, okay? Okay, oh yeah, because that's a T. Not lawful. Okay, lawful. Okay, lawful exists on land and soil. Legal only exists on the seas. Okay, and there's a reason for that. The seas are a chaotic place, a place where man doesn't naturally live. And so you can't have a national law that simply applies to the chaotic out there in the middle of the ocean. And especially because it's area that's legitimately in between all different areas, you're entering a significant jurisdiction, a significant jurisdictional change when you go out on the high seas. And so on the high seas, that's where you get like all the stories of like the captain's word is law on your ship, right? And if you don't follow that, it's called a mutiny, and you can actually get hanged at the nearest port if you commit mutiny, because it's the only amount of law you have is your commitment to each other out at sea, right? And so there's a whole thing that goes into that. But let's talk about criminality. We briefly touched on it for a second. It would be criminal of me for indecent exposure to be naked outside in front of my neighbors, okay? But it's not illegal for me to be naked on this side of my threshold as long as my windows are closed and everything, right? So what makes a criminal? A criminal is someone that breaks a law that is applicable within the jurisdiction that they currently stand, okay? So for example, if it's unlawful for me to run around naked outside, but it's not unlawful for me to do that in here, there are things that would be lawful or legal while you're out at sea that would be illegal and unlawful if you're standing on the land and soil. Okay, let me repeat that. There would be things that are legal and lawful while you're out at sea that would be illegal and unlawful if you're standing on land and soil. Okay? Depending on the jurisdiction in which you stand. Thoughts?
So when you're, okay, yeah.
Nope, you go.
Well, just when you're on the sea, that's the jurisdiction, not the ship.
The ship.
The ship is the.
The ship is the thing that's at sea.
Is the
And if not, you're not going to be alive for very long.
So that's not a different jurisdiction on the ship.
No, if you're on a ship, you're out at sea.
You're out at sea.
Yeah.
Sea is the jurisdiction. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, great question. I mean, if you're technically thrown overboard, you don't have your allegiance to your captain, but you're not going to be alive for very long. You're dead if you're not on a ship.
Unless you have a little.
Unless you're floating on
Life
something.
raft.
And if you're floating on something, it counts as a ship. Eden, did you have a question? Oh, you raised your hand. Okay.
No. Oh, sorry, no.
Okay, good. So we've kind of gotten some of this down. Now, let's go over, okay, these are the natural jurisdictions I was going to talk about. Our founding fathers were geniuses by segregating the American government into different jurisdictions, okay? So, ironically, there's a difference between Idaho and the state of Idaho. Okay, here's the example. Idaho is a factual soil and land that goes beneath it that encompasses other things, right? Idaho is this land and soil, and it is made up of the people that factually, physically exist in the flesh and blood standing on Idaho. Okay, that is the natural definition of Idaho. That make sense? There is a difference between that and an entity created called Idaho. IDAHO, those symbols that are on a piece of paper that is used in trade or commerce in any way, shape, or form. There's a difference between the factual, naturally existing thing versus the fictional thing. Okay? Does that make sense?
I mean, I don't know how you would tell. Like, is it written differently?
Is there a difference between the dirt on the ground and this piece of paper?
Yes.
Even if I write the word dirt on this piece of paper?
Yes.
You sure? Yes. If I write dirt on this paper, it doesn't physically make it dirt.
No.
The dirt is still there. The paper is still here.
Okay.
Okay? So again, when we say Idaho, like descriptively, according to the English language is a descriptive language. We're referring to the land and the soil, the people, the thing that is naturally Idaho. Okay? And again, that's natural law. So, okay, I keep forgetting my piece of paper here. Criminality, breaking the law within the jurisdiction in which it currently stands. Okay, we talked about that. Okay, this is good. This is where we're going to kind of move into a little bit of a Q&A, but I do want to describe a little bit more about the land and soil. Okay? So air is very applicable, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But one of the important things to understand about American law is most countries that exist being born out of the collapse of another society. And so oftentimes you see societies that will adopt certain laws from previous societies. Okay, it's actually really interesting. On American soil, which ironically it's not actually technically on American soil, but in the realm of the US, or as people call it, there is different jurisdictions of law that are utilized all the time. Okay, there's American common law, which is essentially founded in the founding documents, right? You have the Declaration of Independence, which is what makes us naturally independent. You have the constitutions for the United States of America and for the United States, and there's more we can dive into there. But there's the founding documents that make up American common law, as well as the Bill of Rights, a lot of things like that. But then, oh my gosh, what did I just say?
The Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights. No, right before that. Where was I going like this?
You were talking about the various constitutions and the things that make up common law.
Things that make up common law. Okay, yeah, that's where I was going with this. Okay, so there's lots of different things that make up American common law, okay? But one of the things we often see in municipal courts and in territorial courts, you see the judge in the robe, right, with the wig. They're doing the same thing that the Brits did, and they're actually exercising military law, which is ironic. You're actually using a form of Britain law, a British law, an English law that is not American common law, okay? And it even changes further when you start looking at the military. A military court is called a military tribunal. Tribunal is a Roman word. You're utilizing a Roman form of law. People say Rome never fell, it became a church, but it also became a government service provider providing military services, which is why most of the international militaries throughout the world use Roman law in the administration of their military, because Rome created the military laws and passed it down throughout the generations. Now, here's something that's interesting about especially American common law and English law, a little bit Roman law, but it starts to get murky as you go further back. All of these laws are actually biblically based. Okay, there's what's called biblical law or Christian law, and the Bible is actually considered lawful because when Rome accepted Christianity and England accepted Christianity, and then English broke off from the Roman Catholic Church, they established their law under biblical precedent, which is really important when you start studying jurisdiction, because at the very beginning of the Bible, which is considered a lawful script, the very beginning of the Bible, it says that God gave unto man jurisdiction over the land, over the sea, and over the air, over the fowls of the air, the fish of the sea, and the beasts of the earth. Okay? Which means that man, the natural, fleshy, individual man, has a right to live within these jurisdictions freely. Okay? That creates a big problem for people that are tyrants that want to control people, because as soon as you start getting Christians in their heads that they actually have natural rights to stand or to swim or to try to fly in the jurisdictions in which God has given them, you lose control of them because they naturally have a right to it, to be unhindered, right? So for instance, we talked about this. Criminality is when you're taking away a right from somebody else, essentially. If you are removing a jurisdictional privilege from somebody, not privilege, a jurisdictional right from somebody, you're actually creating a criminal act. Like, that is criminality. Because think about it. Remember, our definition of criminality is that somebody does something to break a law within a jurisdiction that the law applies. Okay? And if all of these jurisdictions, according to Christian and biblical law, suggest that man has the dominion over these things, anytime your right to participate in these things is taken or hindered, there is a criminal act being committed. Does that make sense? Okay, now here's the ironic thing. A lot of people, because of the delusions of our day, have been raised to think that there are certain people that are immune to the law, okay? Or that it's like them, it's the government, it's this imaginary, fictional, omnipotent, omnipresent something, but nobody's going to point at the specific guy that does, right? It's not that hard to know that, okay, yeah, maybe a police officer stopped somebody from killing somebody. He was functioning as a peacekeeping officer at the time. He stops a murder. Good job on the police officer. But that doesn't mean the police officer can turn around and steal something, right? The law is applicable to everybody regardless of what governmental delegated authorities are given to you. So what that means is it doesn't matter if you're a citizen, a sovereign, a police officer, breaking a jurisdictional law makes you the criminal. It doesn't matter if you're the President of the United States, it doesn't matter if you're a police officer, and it doesn't matter how many people agree with you, you are breaking American common law and English common law and Christian law and biblical law, which goes back to Mosaic law and canon law, when you do anything to take away a right that belongs to somebody within one of the jurisdictions that are delegated them under the auspices of all of these laws. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
So, police officers are very often doing criminal acts.
Yes, but the problem is the question. They're just as convoluted as everybody else, right? They've been raised in the same system. They're doing what they think is their job. I'm not going to say that any individual police officer is a scumbag, but they have been placed in a situation. They have been placed in a situation where they have been kind of brainwashed and educated to think that it's somehow their right to remove certain rights of others,
Right.
which is totally not applicable. When a police officer is doing his actual job, and this is where we get into the technicalities, okay? So just to say it verbally briefly, you have the people, which are the people that live on the land and soil, and they form a state, a nation, right? The sovereign authority is the state. It's not the country. It's not technically even the nation. The state is where the sovereign authority flows from. And so even in other countries where you have like kings and queens, and let's say they are an actual authoritative king or queen, they function as the head of state, which is why they're able to act as the sovereign for the country. Does that make sense? So it kind of becomes a semantic mess when our founding fathers named it the United States of America, because the word state doesn't just apply to the states in North America.
Right.
The word state applies to literally every independent sovereign nation there is. And we're not the only ones that are allowed to become united in something. And so it creates a situation where so many different people can create different versions of United States and pass them off as us when it's not us. And it leads to a certain amount of delusion and criminality. So, sorry, I was going off on that one. Thoughts?
It just makes me think of all the things that are happening in our current affairs, where you realize that whenever somebody is trying to impede your ability to either defend yourself or to move freely or to protect your body from being forced to participate in or potentially damage it in any way by mandates, that every single one of those things is a criminal act. It makes it very clear what politicians are doing today and who's the baddies and who isn't.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one of the sickest things about it is as soon as you start going down this train and you start getting in the international jurisdictions of the world and you're dealing with jurisdiction frequently, you can't help but know this and recognize it. They literally capitalize on the mass ignorance of jurisdiction to be able to commit these criminal acts. And sometimes they act as though they're trying to be the loving parent who's keeping a secret from you based off of like, oh, you know, the truth's too hard for them, so we're just going to protect them from it. And so even a lot of the quote unquote good politicians or the ones that are helping you out still aren't doing a certain amount of public disclosure that lets you know what the heck is going on.
But sometimes
And so
do they even know?
once you start dealing in the realm of
They know
like
what they're
jurisdictions and you're dealing with things nationally and internationally,
They
and
know what
you're going
they're
to start
doing.
recognizing the jurisdictional boundaries. And again, the founding fathers based the laws off of natural law. And the cool part about that is it's not hard to learn that. It's not like a hidden thing somewhere. The only way you don't recognize what natural law is if you're literally brainwashed out of its recognition, which happens to most of our generation, unfortunately. So most people are walking around, they're completely ignorant. So yeah, maybe your average police officer is completely brainwashed. Maybe your average lawyer is completely brainwashed. And maybe there might even be a couple judges that are completely brainwashed. But generally speaking, the supervisors, the people that are at the heads of these big agencies and these corporations, definitely most of the politicians that are dealing with these, you know, the things they're doing, they recognize that most of the mass populace is clueless. They just want safety, shelter, certain amount of prosperity, but they can capitalize on dividing them and making them hate all each other and then make themselves super wealthy and rich by convincing the mass populace that they, as the quote unquote government, have authority over you, when actually it's completely reversed, because the land and soil are what make up the state. And the state is the one that delegates authorities down the pipeline, right? So you might have the Declaration of Independence, which makes us a natural state and independent. And then you have things like service contracts, like the Constitution, that is to hire people to provide governmental services. And when they provide those governmental services and they act in good faith, they're doing a great job for us. But when they turn it around and turn it on its head and they start harming other people through their service contract, the only reason for government, which is a service provider, the only reason for a government to exist is to protect people and their stuff. If they're not protecting people and they're not protecting their stuff, that government has zero reason to exist, and it is nothing other than a cartel and a gang of criminals. Thugs, that's what they are. And so,
and thieves.
yeah. And the reason this is so important is because it's to recognize this, okay? When you're going about your life and you start studying things, they're like, huh, that's an interesting law, or huh, that's an interesting jurisdictional boundary. And you start asking questions and people start pushing you down and say, don't look into that or don't do that. You have to recognize who the criminal is, okay? It's not you, the one that's interested in your own safety, in the roof over your head, in your simple rights of movement and speech and ownership. You're not the criminal. You have zero reason to feel insecure, to feel like, oh, what am I doing that's wrong? To think that you're like the minority? No, because people throughout history and throughout the eternities are on the same page that natural law reigns supreme. And you are the innocent one. You're the victim if people are taking away those rights. And the person that's taking away that right is going to be forever labeled as a criminal if they don't stop that behavior sooner or later. And so you have no reason to think, oh, I'm the bad guy. I'm the insurrectionist. I'm the one trying to better America and make the situation better for your future posterity. Yeah, you're the scumbag. So that's one of the biggest hiccups and biggest stumbling blocks people run into when they start studying like American common law. They start figuring out how to assemble like the First Amendment states you can assemble. You start figuring out what rights actually apply to you and how to utilize them. And then suddenly you're like labeled as this crazy criminal out there, or like the stupid sovereign citizen title and all that stuff. It is being done by criminals who are interested in keeping your rights away from you. Does that make sense?
They lull you into a carnal security.
It's not even that secure. It's a burning house.
It's a burnout.
It's a burning house. I don't know why you're
Oh,
inside.
burning
People are
house.
like trying to and this is something that Dustin said once. He was like, I don't know why people are so defensive of the de facto. They're trying to get us to prove that there's water outside because the house is on fire. Just get out. It's like the house might be burning down and we're like, come out, come out. They're like, do you got water? Doesn't matter. Get out of the freaking house. It's a burning house.
So I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So with the CIA, they have stated sovereign citizens are a
Terrorist group.
terrorist group. Why is that?
Yeah. So, okay. So we have to define what sovereign citizen is, okay?
Yeah.
Again, it's all legalese, okay? Sovereign citizen is an oxymoron.
Okay.
Okay, and it's important because citizen by definition means you owe an allegiance to a government. Okay? Sovereign by definition means you are free of any allegiance to any government. Okay? So you can't say sovereign citizen. It doesn't exist. It is a fictional thing. There was a huge group of people, primarily in Utah, that started calling themselves sovereign citizens. And not most of them, some of them were completely innocent of it, but there was a lot of people that were trying to capitalize on the system and use it to their benefit and say that they were somehow immune to all law, which just isn't the case at all. And they were being combatant, right? I mean, even the master taught, agree with thine adversary quickly while thou art in the way with him, lest at any point he shall get thee, and thou shalt be condemned and cast into prison, right? So again, Jesus Christ even taught, you want to be peaceful with your interactions, even with your enemy, while you're in the way with him, okay? So there's a difference between being pulled over by a police officer who might be trespassing against one of your rights, and so you're arguing with him and becoming combative, versus he tries to trespass against one of your rights, and you provide your information, you let them know who you are, what jurisdiction in which you stand, and you allow him to criminally trespass against you, and then you win later in the paperwork side. Okay, there's a huge difference. But sorry, going back to your question of sovereign citizens. So number one, sovereign citizens don't exist, which means the CIA is not committing a criminal act by labeling sovereign citizens as terrorists, because it doesn't exist. It would be different if they just said that American state nationals are criminals or terrorists, because American state nationals exist naturally. This is actually huge. Oh, this is such a good place to go. Okay, so we talked about these jurisdictions, right? Okay, a jurisdiction, a nation is a soiled off area, like lined out area that is a state. Okay, so Idaho is a nation. Okay, if you're born on Idaho soil, you are by all English definition an American state national, because you are nationally from a state that is in America. Okay, so you're not saying anything crazy by saying you're an American state national. And the CIA can't label American state nationals as terrorists, because that's everybody that's ever been born on American soil by definition. Okay, now it becomes a little bit muddy when an American state national is born on Idaho soil or any other one of the states of the Union, and then they're immediately labeled a different type of citizenship. They get given papers to make them look like they've got enlisted in the military, which is essentially what the birth certificate and social security number are. It's oh, yep, you're an American, but your mother's stupid and ignorant, so you're essentially left here abandoned, and so we're going to take care of you and enlist you in our private military. And then they write you up, right? So I'm not sure if that answers the question. So number one, they have the right they have the right to label people, not people, they have the right to label fictional things as whatever they want because it's fictional. And then you also got to understand where the flow of authority comes from the CIA, which that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But again, they're an entity that is incorporated, that is existing for profit, that has revenue streams they're trying to keep in security. And they haven't always been kept totally accountable to their own actions. So sometimes they're willing to push the bucket and commit criminal acts. But it is technically not criminal for them to label sovereign citizens as terrorists because sovereign citizens don't exist.
Right. Makes sense. Okay.
Does it? Okay. And then there's the whole combatant thing, right? You have think about this. You have an entity that exists. It's a corporation that's been hired to provide a government service. Okay. They have started to become super wealthy. It's super successful business. They're making lots of money on it. They want to protect their revenue streams. Okay. They know who their actual bosses are, primarily the Federation of the United States of America, which is made up of state citizens who are actual Americans who stand on the land and soil. Okay. They know who their actual bosses are. And they know that a significant amount of their bosses are currently running around playing dress up, pretending that they're foreign citizenships as U.S. citizens at the high seas. But that, there's a lot of the media coming out in the public record that's actually kind of revealing this. We're going to have a lot more of our bosses telling us what to do if more Americans know what their rights are. So why not create some random propaganda to scare people away from it? In fact, there's those people that are idiots and they think they're sovereign citizens. Let's just capitalize on that and try to make it sound like that's the American common law and scare everybody away. So you know what? We're gonna blow that up everywhere in the media. And technically it's not against the law because it's not illegal, freedom of speech. They can say whatever they want, right? They can put something out there in the world that makes sovereign citizens look crazy and then try to get people to accidentally accuse anybody that's studying American common law as sovereign citizens. See what I'm saying?
It's fear-mongering.
It's fear-mongering. It's fear porn is what it is. And we call it that because it's addictive. It's super messed up and it will wreck your mind and cripple you with fear and you will never get away from it. You will go till your grave being afraid of this imaginary, omnipotent, non-existent government that's trying to control you.
Right. Because slowly, and here's what I've noticed. Slowly and surely, government's buying more land. And we're slowly and surely, people are leasing more. They're not owning their properties. They're not owning things. Okay, how do we combat against that?
So let's dive into that real quick. This is a good question. So when you say the government's buying more land, okay, the government is a legal entity.
Yeah.
Okay, it cannot own anything. It can only have title to it. It can only quote unquote rent it.
Right.
Okay. So when we say the government buys land, there's different government service providers. So Idaho exists. Idaho is the factual, natural soil and land jurisdiction, and we're made up of people. And we say, hey, let's hire somebody to take care of our land for us. Look at our neighbors over there, the Brits. You know, they got some pretty good services. Let's go. Come and take care of our stuff. We create what's called the Bureau of Land Management. Okay. Great company that's going to take care of our natural resources. And we say, hey, you know what? Take care of our natural resources. We'll pay a good price. They say, great. They start taking care of it. And then they're like, it's been a while. And they start looking around and they realize the people that hired them were actually the grandparents of the people that are currently around. The grandparents are dead and they might not remember exactly what our service contract was. In fact, one of our neighbors that lives in Canada right now is willing to pay us a lot of money to let them use the Idahoans' land to dig up a lot of mineral resources that they want to turn around and sell to some foreign military. Hey guys, I'm gonna sell some of your land and mineral resources to Canada. Tell me to stop and I'll stop. Tell me to stop and I'll stop. Nobody tells me to stop. Come on, Canada, do it. Canada comes and take the resource, right? Because nobody is holding the government service provider, the BLM, accountable for what their actual job is. The Bureau of Land Management's job is to protect the land resources of Idaho, okay? So if they are not doing that, and if they're doing it without the permission of their employers by damaging it, they're committing a criminal act, okay? So they should be treated like any criminal should be treated. They should be prosecuted. So again, they don't own land, and the only way you can combat that is by unincorporating it. There's a lot of actually historical precedent to this. this would be good, but maybe this would be better for another lesson, another time. How are you guys doing with attention span? Think we should cut it off for the video and everything?
I think there's so much here, so many different rabbit holes to go down. We've talked a little bit about the birth certificate, but that should be expanded upon.
Mm-hmm.
All of the different ways that you can become an incorporated entity unwittingly. That I think it would probably be good to make it several installments.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, this has been fantastic, but it has been about an hour.
Yeah, you're right.
Wait, I just have one last question.
Yeah, ask questions. That's what I want.
If the government doesn't own any land, if they're not able to, is all the land in America, is that just split up then with, like, people owning it? Like, whoever owns that land,
So,
like, person owns that
Yep.
land?
Yep. So there's two different. So this is interesting. So there is what's called a sovereign, and there's what's called a sovereign in your own right. Okay. In a country, let's say England, which really bad example because technically this isn't accurate over there because they're all a bunch of criminals. But let's say England actually has an authoritative queen. Okay, and she holds sovereignty and functions as the head of state, or the king, or whatever. Right? Functions as the head of state. Everybody that's there that functions under the law of kings functions as a citizen or a slave to the sovereign. Okay? It's different for a place like America, where naturally being born on the soil makes you a sovereign in your own right. But it's a different type of sovereignty because it's a shared sovereignty. Because Idaho, the soil state, is where the flow of authority goes through to the Idaho Assembly. So Idahoans that are sovereign naturally all collectively share the sovereign load, which is why they have to peaceably assemble. Okay? They as a whole inherit all the land and soil resources of Idaho. Even though the private portions of it might be individually owned, they as a whole own all of that land. Okay? And when you said, what do you mean the government doesn't own any land? This is one of the things we really got to get away from. The biggest deceptions in our time come from semantic deceit and the disintegration of our language. Saying the government is completely ambiguous. I am an American state citizen who functions as a moderator on the Idaho Assembly calls. I'm technically a part of the Idaho government. And also, there's like 84 different organizations and entities that exist as state of Idaho or Idaho State or all these other different groups. So really what we should be saying is governmental service agencies, and then we got to specify which one, right? Because it's like the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management on Idaho, has one contract and they do some things. Sometimes they act criminally. There's other governmental services that actually do a decent job. The post office, for instance, that is a governmental service provider under the municipality. Okay, that is a foreign governmental service provider. They actually make it so our mail gets most places. It's pretty great, right? That's great. We can praise that governmental service provider. But that governmental service provider doesn't equate to the entirety of the government. In fact, most of them don't even communicate with each other. They're all like different entities doing different jobs and all trying to fight for their little piece of profit in their realm of what they provide. So the government isn't this omnipotent, omnipresent thing, right? Most people, when they say the government, they're thinking of like Washington, D.C. or whatever, but even that's not accurate because that's made of tons of different entities. And you have two different technical governments. You have the military and you have the municipality. And so it breaks up. So there's no government, singular. There's government service agencies. Does that make sense?
I think so. So it would be correct to say that people own land, businesses cannot own land, or entities can't own land.
They can hold title.
So everyone in Idaho on the land and
On Idaho.
on Idaho
Standing on it.
on Idaho owns Idaho collectively.
If you were born on it, or if you become nationalized to it. Okay?
Okay.
So there's obviously the system by which somebody can immigrate. And there's different rules for people that immigrated out of the states of the Union. It's like 7 years, right? But within the states of the Union, if you're born on it, you can become nationalized in a year and a day on another state, right? So you are not considered a Utahan if you move to Utah, even though you were born on Washington. I think that's where you were born. You're a Washingtonian, but you can inherit a Utah nationality by moving there and living there for a year and a day. It's different for somebody that came out of the United States of America, out of the states of the Union. But as an American born on land and soil, you are naturally sovereign, which means you don't owe any allegiance to any government. Okay? Not sovereign citizen, just sovereign. You are sovereign naturally, unless you voluntarily choose to have a certain allegiance to a government. I am not sovereign. I'm an American state citizen because I have taken office in the Idaho Assembly, and now I actually owe an obligatory allegiance to a government. So
Lawful government.
the actual government on Idaho, yeah, which is made up of Idahoans functioning as American state citizens running the Idaho Assembly, so that Idahoans actually have voice, so that we can petition the government service providers for a redress of grievances, just like the First Amendment states. But this is where the criminals get away with a lot of stuff, right? They have a service obligation to their employers, but how do you prove you're my employer? Show me your paperwork. Oh, you're an idiot and you've never recorded paperwork? That sucks. I don't have to think of you as my boss. That's how it works. This is actually a thing in law, and this is what we can end on. Ignorance is negligence. Ignorance is no excuse when it comes to the law, unless you're younger than 21. As long as you're 21 years old, you're considered a lawful majority, and your ignorance is no excuse for you to not know your rights. And so when you get born and your mother doesn't record a baby deed for you on the public record, and you're in a hospital and there's a uniformed officer who's licensed by a government service provider that says, oh, well, you're not going to give your baby paperwork, I'll take it, gets the certificate and everything. If you haul that birth certificate around or the Social Security around, and you say, this is me, they look at that, and that is literally an incorporated entity. They're not recognizing you as a living woman, Gianna, that's got a baby deed and paperwork that shows that you exist as an American. They're looking at this deed, which is actually a bond, and they're thinking, oh, this is a legal entity. Legality exists on the sea. This is owed the law of commerce, which is interactions between corporations on sea law. So they don't think, oh, this is Gianna, the living woman that's owed American common law. They're going to give you the law that you're owed based on what you provide to them.
I think that's where we start next time.
Okay. Good. Whew. Hopefully that was worth it.
Well done.
I hope that recorded.